like to open up the floor to ask Clark questions. Clark, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. I don't know if I can hear students okay, so speak loudly.
Okay.
So Clark, the issue with a lot of this is really depends on who is utilizing it for what, right? And we can never make the assumption, we like to make the assumption that it's corporate use or good people are going to use this. But if you can track people, if you can do behavior-based tracking, you can begin to follow people's paths. I mean, what is the ultimate outcome of that? Privacy is negligible at this point, right? Or will be. People can direct behavior. People can begin to control your behavior based on red lights or other spaces.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a risk. One of the things that I meant to cover, and I didn't touch on it, is there are some benefits to this kind of widespread digital surveillance. One of them is the idea of surveillance, which is the opposite of surveillance. Like surveillance is the corporate entities or the states watching you, but surveillance is the guy on the subway who takes the video of the police officer beating up the civilian or whatever. Those are interesting kind of counterpoints to this. But to your comment, I think one of the most important ways to fight this is to realize it's there, right? Like the realization that all of this intelligence gathering happens, whether you like it or not, leads you to research ways to mitigate that and to anonymize yourself, and it at least gives you knowledge that it's happening. And so there's things you can do, like to avoid ad networks. There's software that you can plug in that will identify the code on a website that makes cookies and passes the information back to the ad network, and you can block those cookies. Or you can use a software like the Onion Router, which allows for pretty anonymized communication between any point on a network. The interesting thing with the Onion Router was actually developed by the CIA for operatives working internally in foreign governments. Because of this widespread surveillance, they built this software and they released it because in order for it to work most effectively, they needed more network traffic. And they needed more points in the network for the Onion Router. So they released it publicly so that they could have better protection for their own agents, but it works as a counterintelligence tool, if you have reason to use it. And another thing is, you can just use incognito mode on your browser, and just every time you start a new browser history, it clears your their tracking, right? So it's limited to whatever the session is that you're doing. Encryption is another huge tool to counter surveillance, and it's, I'm a big fan of, we call them cypherpunks, and they're groups of people that have been active since the 1980s, working on different ways to encrypt data and make encryption harder to break. There's reason to believe, based on historical evidence, that the NSA has broken some already accepted safe algorithms in the current generation. And historically, like there's a famous algorithm that was released for public review. The NSA stated like, hey, you need to change these 2 or 3 things to make it hardened. And they did it, and there was a lot of speculation like, oh, they're putting in a back door or whatever. And then when that algorithm was actually cracked, they went back, looked at the modifications the NSA made, and they had made it more difficult to crack. It would have failed like 10 years earlier. And so, by extrapolation from that one data point, you can assume that they're about 10 years ahead of commercial encryption technology. And the other thing is getting involved with groups like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF, and pursuing lobbying efforts, because, like I said, one of the only ways that you can effectively mitigate this, at least in the government realm and in the corporate realm within the United States, is through effective legislation.
Okay. Does anybody have questions or?
And is the legislation only for us to adapt to this new technological frontier? Because there seems to be this, discourse that technology is running too fast and we can only create the laws that can put us up to speed to it, or can kind of buffer the impact that it has. But I don't know, like in other realms of science, there has been certain blockage from government agencies, let's say cloning technology, that they have, I don't know, not agreed upon, but stated that it's unethical to continue this for X or Y reason. Has there ever been an ethical questioning of the advancement of technology that can lead to greater surveillance, or that is off the table?
No, I mean, I think there is all the time. Like I said, the EFF fights tooth and nail repeatedly over the last 10 or 20 years to limit domestic surveillance of US citizens. So, I mean, there's definitely ethical questions being asked and legislation presented and court cases being fought even after legislation is passed. So if there's bad legislation passed and the only way to repeal it, is either through the judicial system or, overturning it with a new law. So those are, did that answer your question?
Oh,
So what you're really saying is what's available to a corporation or to a law enforcement agency, it might be 1,000 times more powerful than what the CIA could gather 15 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. If you just look at computing power, it's increased exponentially. There's evidence that the NYPD and the LAPD and these different forces police forces used some of this facial recognition technology during the Occupy Wall Street movements to target not just protesters, but the organizers. And the interesting thing was Occupy theoretically was like a headless movement. And so anyone could come in and say their thing, but obviously people develop influence, some people are more articulate and they drive whatever. And there was video footage, they're constantly surveilling Zuccotti Park from multiple angles with these cameras that specialized in facial recognition and had like these crazy antennas that were built specifically to send high-speed video wirelessly somewhere, or high-definition video wirelessly somewhere else. And there's video that you can see on YouTube and stuff where basically like, I don't know if you remember the Mighty Ducks, but the Flying V, where like a police group would insert themselves into the occupiers and like snatch an individual while like blocking the V to keep everyone else out, and just take like one person out of the crowd and then bring back in. And those were like tactical maneuvers to basically like destabilize the movement. And it was all based on their surveillance. So, yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Clark, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
Sorry I couldn't be there in person.
Well, you're here, so thank you. Thank you so much.